I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to Campfire Talk. This is where we sit around the fire, put our feet up with a cold drink, and let the conversation flow. We got a couple of things before we get rolling here. Tom, would you like to make an announcement?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And the Campfire Talk, of course, as you all know, is just kind of an informal, we just talk and see where the conversation goes. If you want to support the show, you can do so by clicking on the like and subscribe button if you haven't subscribed already. Costs you nothing, and but it helps us tremendously. And for those of you who want to take it a step further, you can do that. There's a link in the description on YouTube for Patreon, and or you can just go to Patreon/Creek Devil, and for as little as $1 a month. It's a huge help, and a bunch of people are doing that, and we really, really appreciate it. So that said, I'm going to hand the mic back to Will.
Okay. Last week we talked about Carroll and Missouri needing some assistance from folks out there. We've had quite a few people on YouTube in the comments that have stated they'd like to be able to help her. It's not monetary or anything like that. We've had a few responses, and I've connected her with some people out there who listen. She's got a situation going on that she could use some assistance with. And so if anybody knows, if they're familiar with platforms like Reddit and some of these other things, she could use some help in that regard. And I won't say what's going on with her. What I'll do is if you email me at wjevning@gmail.com, then I will connect you with her, and she can explain better than I could. So she can really use the assistance, folks. Okay, so we were discussing things that we were going to chat about. I got an email, and this is from Mike. Mike says, "Hi, Will. I live in Canton, East Texas, surrounded by hundreds of acres of heavily wooded forest. I have a feed plot at the edge of the woods and always felt uneasy there, like I'm being watched. My wife and I used to watch Searching for Bigfoot, and as we both heard whoops, I decided to do some calls a few times. I know that was a big mistake. A few weeks later, while tossing apples near the feeder a few times a week, I started noticing every apple completely gone the next morning. No pieces anywhere. Then I noticed other things like less coyotes at night. I found a large mound of dark grayish black poop full of seeds by my deer feeder that didn't look like any scat that I've ever seen, and a few trees that either fell over or were pushed over at night, but I dismissed all of this as just odd. There's a park called Curtis Creek nearby where my wife and I found the front legs of a deer torn off at the joints cleanly and lying near a hiking trail. There's no hunting allowed there, and no animal would have left body parts lying around without teeth marks so close to each other, or without blood body or signs of a struggle. This was hunting season, November, and I was out about 8 p.m. one night tossing out apples by my feeder when I heard movement rustling leaves around by a deep low growl about 30-35 feet away from my left. This really spooked me because I know animal sounds and what we have here, and this wasn't a hog, coyote, cougar, or dog, and we don't have any bears in this particular area. And this felt like a warning from something intelligent to leave the area immediately, so I did just that and headed back to the house. I haven't seen a Bigfoot, but figured I'd tell my story to see if there are others in my area who also are hearing whoops, growls, finding weird scat, or sensing something around their feed plots, etc. I enjoy your work and listen all the time. Keep up the good work, Mike." What do you guys think? I mean,
Well, Will, I'll jump in real quick. You and I, last summer, we heard growls.
We did.
And there was one idiot in the group that decided to, did I hear a growl? Decided to walk towards the growls, got confirmation, and booked it on out of there. You remember that?
Was that your brother by chance?
No. That was you and me. You
and me were the idiots.
Yeah. We were at the very front of the trail of people, and we'd heard, it sounded like gunshots in the middle of the woods, but it wasn't gunshots. It was whacks on trees, loud whacks. And okay, yeah, whatever. And we went in and we heard the growl. I'm like, was that really a growl? Yeah. And but anyway, I pushed in further just to see what would happen. Yes, it growled right back. And you said, we don't run. We nonchalantly turn around, pretend walk like away like nothing's going on. Right?
And that's kind of a big thing. I mean, regardless of what kind of animal's out there, if you run, that can trigger a chase response. And it's something I've practiced for years. If I hear something, pretend like nothing's going on and just reverse my course and head back out of the area. And I'm here to talk about it, so apparently it works.
Right, exactly.
If we could get some recordings of the whoops, I'd like to hear that to see what those sound like.
Yeah, Mike, if you're listening, we definitely, if you can record some of that stuff, send it to us. We'd like to hear what's going on there.
Now, did he say Canton, Canton, Texas?
Yes.
Okay. That's in East Texas, so.
Right.
And it's somewhere around Tyler, if I remember correctly. And that's a big area from Bigfoot encounters.
I would say if anybody's listening that's in that region, let us know. Mike would like to know if other people are hearing and seeing these things too. And I don't know how close that is to Joe and Walter, but I'll have to ask them.
Where are they at?
I want to say Joe's in Houston, but kind of in that part of the state anyway.
Well, Houston's down on the coast, but it's in East Texas. So Tyler's up farther north, up 45 there. But
isn't Canton? Isn't that the place that has the flea market every so often?
Yeah, they have a great big, huge flea market there. Yeah,
that's what I thought.
Okay. Well,
any audio or pictures he could send, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're finding scat and things like that, I've got some really good photos of that stuff we can compare it to. But it's interesting. I mean, I'll get people, excuse me, send me pictures or emails like that often. And, it's always a good thing. If we can, learn the context of what's going on in an area, we can really, put the picture together to see what's happening. And oftentimes, there are other people that are seeing more things, than maybe what the initial person did. Oh, Tom had to run, guys, so he's not with us right now. Well, I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, it's, yeah, he had a chore he had to go do, so he had to leave. So what's the weather going on like with you guys? I mean, David, you've had some bad weather, and Tracy, and not Bigfoot related, but
It's hot and humid and getting cloudy again, so we're going to have another storm probably this evening.
I wish you'd send some of that my way.
What it's been like here? It's like it's warm during the day and cold at night. Yeah, what's up, Chuck?
I was going to say something and ask you your opinion of this. And
yeah, sure.
One of the things that we had on the Q&A was somebody asked a question about what happens when they die, or what are some of the things that they
right. What do they do with their
theories? And right, and one of the things that I've found in my area, and I've actually posted it on Facebook a long time ago, and actually had other people responding to what I had said. We had found these mounds, and they were in northwestern Oklahoma, and these mounds are huge. I mean, they're 3 to 4 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide, and we've taken pictures of them, and I put it out there on Facebook about it, and I had several responses from people who have done research, and they have found the same things. And I took pictures of those stuff and went up to the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribe, because that was their land where we were at, and I took them to the chief, and I told threw the pictures on his table, and I said, "What are these?" And he said, "Those are burial mounds." He said, "But they're not ours." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? What do you mean they're not yours?" And he said, "They're way too big to be our mounds." And is there a possibility that is actually taking place out there?
Well, I'll tell you a story.
They actually bury their dead.
I'll tell you a story. You remember me talking about the guy Carlo? In fact, well, if Tom was here, he'd be interested in this part. He was the guy who was friends with Linda Moulton Howe, and his thing was cattle mutilations, but he'd actually had a couple of Bigfoot experiences. So when I lived in Vancouver, he was across the river in Portland, and got in contact with me, and we used to go to the field together pretty often. And on one of these trips, now there was this old guy named Davis Perry who lived in Carson, Washington, and he was, there are people out there that say, they try to latch on to anybody who was back in those days, in the 80s or whatever, as sort of, like they were some Bigfoot guru or something. The guy was a crackpot. He was a nice old man, but he was crazy as heck. Really was not a source of any valid information whatsoever. But we were out with him one time, and he says, "Hey, there's something I found out here. I got to show you guys." So we were, near the Bonneville Dam, and we stopped along this road, and we had to walk cross country, and I don't remember, it was a couple hundred yards through the timber to this spot. And what we got to back there were, and I counted them and I measured them, there were 9 mounds of rocks. Now the rocks were probably, I guess about cantaloupe size rocks. The piles were about 5 feet high and measured about 10 feet across, some a little bit larger. And I took pictures of them. In fact, in my first book, Notes from the Field, I put some of those pictures in that book. So if people want to see those pictures, that's where they are. So I took my pictures and showed them to a buddy of mine who was from the Klamath Reservation, and he had friends who were local native folks there in the Columbia River Gorge. And they said, and I asked them, I said, are these made by the local tribes? And the answer was, no, that's not ours. I said, well, what do you mean it's not yours? Whose are they? And one of the guys says, well, those are the big guys' burial mounds. So we went back there. I went back to take some more pictures with Carlo, and my background, early training was archaeology, and I'd worked on a couple of digs after I graduated the field school. So I'm on my knees trying to excavate one of these piles. I want to see what's under it. And he was more of a sociologist, so I'm totally ignoring him. And as I'm moving the rocks on the side, he's putting the rocks back in. And after about a half an hour, I'm thinking, how come I'm not making any progress? And I look over at him, and he's saying, oh yeah, I really don't think we should disturb these. They're probably Native American. I said, Carlo, I've already established they're not with the local natives. So he was insistent that we don't disturb him, so we didn't. And then when I talked to our friend who's a forensic anthropologist, John, that we've had on, we discussed that, and he says, well, he showed him the pictures, had him describe the spot. Now, mind you, most of these rocks, the rock piles had moss on them, so they'd been there for a long time. Were no fresh ones there. These were pretty old. And he says, because of the porous nature of that configuration and insects and everything else, he said there's probably nothing left under those piles, so it wouldn't do much good to excavate them anyway, so we didn't. And I haven't been back to the place since, but that's the only time I've seen anything like that.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here, guys, because the archaeologist in me is itching now.
That was my thought.
I can't answer anything on the West Coast there because I'm not really familiar with any type of mound building out there. But Chuck, you do have to consider, and I think you and I discussed this too when you told me about this. A lot of times, you will get, when we have mounds in East Texas, and I know you have mounds in southeastern Oklahoma, and they're all over Arkansas, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and the Cherokee. You asked the Cherokee, and Sam Houston even there's a famous location in East Texas that Sam Houston made peace with the Cherokees in that area, and there's a mound right adjacent to where they did this. And he was a friend to the Cherokee. And the Cherokee and the Alabama Coushatta and the eastern portions of Texas will tell you, no, we did not build the mounds. That's the answers you'll get from the people. And they don't usually elaborate on it because they don't know who built them. The Mississippian culture and the Hopewell culture extended into areas of Oklahoma, eastern Oklahoma, and eastern Texas. There are even some in my area. They are burial mounds of the Mississippian and the Hopewell cultures. Some have been excavated, some have not. So I'm just saying that very well may be the answer to your question right there. I mean, I would not immediately jump to the conclusion that it might be a Bigfoot, but you know what? It might be.
But here's
I
the
don't
difference.
know. There's always that big but in there. I'm not saying that.
But here's the difference. It's one thing when they say they don't know, they're not theirs. But when they add onto that, it's these things. And Chuck has heard it, and I was told
now,
it. They specifically said it was theirs.
Well, now, did they say? You said they said the big guys, or did they specifically designate it? I'm not questioning. I'm just asking.
They meant the creatures.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying that very well may be in your area. I can't speak to that, but
it's different in different regions.
I don't know of any mound developed mound building cultures in your area, but I do know that they had an ancient culture here, which was called the Mississippian, and and they had a lot of Mayan connections to those people too. Even through DNA, they're finding out with the people in those areas too.
And there's another part to it too, and I'm not sure if it's connected because there weren't any of the rock stacks and piles. Rock stacks and piles are different than these mounds, so you have to be careful what you're discussing. And after I've mentioned it, and I put it in my book, Notes from the Field, also some of the pictures I took, and some of the, this was something that Renee DeHinden put me on. He came to the house. I've mentioned we used to visit each other all the time. And on one of his trips back from California, back in the 80s, he called me and he says, hey, I'm going to be in, Estacada, Oregon tomorrow. You guys want to meet for lunch? I said, sure, or breakfast. I said, sure. So Carlo and I, we met him at a place that I think is no longer there. It was called the Safari Club, and that's where we had breakfast. So we sat and we just kind of chewed the fat about lots of different things, not necessarily Bigfoot. But towards the end of the time when he was getting ready to leave, I said, hey, Renee, since we're in Estacada, I said, Green had a single picture in one of his early books. And it wasn't a very good picture. I mean, I think Green, he just did a really bad job on what he wrote about this particular place. And the basis of it was a story that came from a logger. And this was in the fall of 1967, where these two guys were out. They were going to do some work. It was really cold, and the skidder operator didn't need this guy. This guy was a choker setter and, kind of the helper. So he was just kind of wandering around, trying to find something to do and keep warm while he was waiting for this guy to get himself ready for the work. So, and he's wandering around, he sees these three creatures. And he can tell that it's a male, a female, and a very young juvenile. And the adults are kind of walking along, and they're turning rocks over, and they sniff them. They put them up really close to their face. They're smelling them, and then they put them back down. And then they were actually stacking them occasionally. So at one point, the male leaps onto this one spot and starts pulling the rocks out. And these are pretty good-sized rocks. They're not little rocks. They're not something a man could do. You're talking 200-300 pounds on average, these rocks. And it makes this hole, and it comes up with apparently a nest of rodents, where they sort of divvied them up and ate them, and then they discovered this guy there watching them, and then they make a hasty retreat. So I said, Renee, where's... Oh, and I'm getting back to Green's picture. He has his son standing in the hole, and then you can see a rock stack or two next behind him, and he just kind of makes a one-page thing out of it like it's no big deal. So I said, Renee, what's the story behind this? And he tells me, essentially what, they interviewed the guy and what Green put in his book. I said, well, where is this place? I said, it just says Estacada. He says, I'm heading up this highway. He says, follow me up there and I'll show you where it's at. So we drove up there, and he says, okay, look. He says, drive down this logging road over here, and he says, you'll come to an end, and then you'll see a trail that goes up into the woods up there. So he left, and then he says, go take a look at it, and then give me a call, let me know what you think. So we got there, and it was getting dark, so we could see some of the rock stacks around there, but we had to leave because we couldn't see anything, and we weren't prepared with lights or anything. So we came back another day. And I went there several times. I took my field team with me at the time, and somebody in that team apparently, let the location be known. And I think even the Finding Bigfoot people went to that particular site, and and at that site there were, and I've got it documented somewhere how many of the stacks and things that were there, and the differentiation in my book notes from the field. The hole is still there, at least it was. Last time I was there, and that was, probably 15 years ago or more, 20 years ago. So I'm 6 feet tall. I'm in the hole. Now the hole is 6 feet deep, and it's about 6 feet across. It's a big hole. It's not something small. And with these, there were both stacks and piles of rocks in the area. But it wasn't just that. Renee told me how to find additional sites, that he was the only one that knew where they were. And these sites are nowhere near human accessibility at all. You have to do some hiking in the mountains, cross country, to find these spots. And I've located, through Renee telling me, how to find these places, 9 different sites in Washington and Oregon, and Fred and I've talked. And not just Fred, but there's some other witnesses from, no, it wasn't Fred. Let me back up. It was a guy that we had, Dan, on the show 2-3 years ago. And Dan said the job he worked on, they flew 37 kilometers to the work site. So there was absolutely no roads up in that country in the Yukon to where they were working. And he had an encounter there, had some great footprints he photographed. And we talked privately, and he says, yeah, there were these rock stacks up there. And people have, since I first brought this out in the public through my books, you get pictures, you see them on Facebook, and they're obviously manufactured by people because they're little rocks and they're real intricate and things like that. When the Sasquatches do them, there are typically either 3 or 4 rocks in a stack. No more than that. typically. I think I found one that may have had 5. And then some of these were piles, and not piled like a person would. They're almost kind of stacked, but you'd have to look at my book to see the pictures. They're very clear examples of each. So what those indicate, no idea. However, I had to think about the size of that hole. And it made me wonder, well, geez, it goes back to that survival equation. If you're going to expend a lot of energy, you need more caloric intake than expenditure to equal survival, right? So why would they dig that big a hole, put that much effort into only getting like 3 rodents each, small rodents? It didn't make any sense to me. And then I thought later, oh, what if they were preparing an area for a burial? But they got disturbed by a man, so they never returned to that spot, which is common practice for these creatures.
Well, I will say that in this particular area, it's a very active area. We've found tracks there. We know they're in there, and wood structures in this area as well. And when you go down through there, you can actually. I had a thermal imager with me because we started hearing footsteps behind us as we're going through this area, and I turned on my thermal and saw Bigfoot probably 30 to 40 yards from us, and they were following us, watching us, and there was probably 4 to 7 of them, a couple of juvies and adults that were trailing us through this area. And
that's not good.
These mounds that I'm talking about, these are all, there's no rocks at all on these mounds. It's all dirt. It's like a dirt mound. And you can tell these aren't ancient or anything like that. I mean, it doesn't look like that to me. And I've had a couple people that have went out there with me in this area, and they said, let's dig one up. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that, especially when the activity there is so hyped up. There ain't no telling what would happen if you started, if that's what these things are. There's no telling what would happen if you started digging one up. And, there's a story in Honabi, of the one that got shot. And there was a truck driver that seen one being carried across the highway up to the mountaintop. And supposedly they went up there and buried that thing up there.
Yeah, there's been a few stories of it being carried off by their own.
So that's just one thing that I was considering is, these things are somehow or another, they figured out a way to dispose of the dead bodies.
Yeah, I would think it's different with different groups, I suppose. I mean, some might bury them, some might just leave them out there. It depends if, you've got an individual that dies by itself out there and not really associated with a group. It's really hard telling, until we know more about them. But it's not, so, people like to make, they like to make, what do you say, kind of a group statement about something. It's like, well, it's not a one size fits all. So if people are out there thinking, oh, we say they're burying them, how come there aren't more of these places? Well, they're not all doing that. It's not a one size fits all.
I wonder if some of them would eat them.
That's been mentioned too in stories. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that they wouldn't cannibalize their dead, in some cases.
That's a lot of protein they could take in.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And again, it's something, we have no idea about. There are stories out there that say that. Whether they're true or not, we don't know.
Could be cannibalism.
Yeah,
and then bury the bones.
Yeah, exactly. Or eat the bones. I mean, they eat bones of other animals.
Well,
so.
yeah.
So it's just hard telling. It's one of those things, we can speculate on, but there's not much we really know. The only thing we do know is we find some of these artifacts out there, and the native folks, in those areas will say that's not ours, that's theirs.
That I've always wondered how if this is what these things are doing, where did they get the idea from? And a lot of Native Americans actually were, taken to Oklahoma, and it's just really funny to me that these mounds are out there. And did they follow the Indians into Oklahoma and learned from the Indians? Just like it's just like the fact that they backtrack in their own tracks. That is a Native American trait.
Well, they've been watching humans a long time, so you can bet they'll emulate some things that we do.
Right.
Tracy, ever heard anything like? Oh, go ahead, man. I'm sorry.
It just puts a whole different spin on things. That's for sure.
Well, it does. That's for certain. Tracy, you ever hear anything like that in your region?
Well, I've been listening to you guys talk about this, and now, this whole area, most of Alabama back in the 1800s was plantations and small farms and such. In fact, you can walk through the woods just about anywhere down here and find where the land has been terraced off, but there are now, 80 to 100-year-old trees growing on it. Now, my Aunt Sudie, she was a full-blood Creek Indian. She married my great uncle, and they had about 500 acres of land, probably about an hour and a half away from here. And she would get these ideas, especially when we're up there during the summer. We'd go spend 2 or 3 weeks at a time, And she loved having us up there because that's when she could get all the hard work done. She'd want to make flower beds. She'd want to do this, do that. So she'd have us drive her old tractor out through the woods, and all over the woods of Alabama, everywhere I've ever been in the woods, you can run up on piles of rocks that were thrown there by farmers, gathered out of the fields and just piled up in the piles. You can find them. There are 4 or 5 of those piles on my grandmother's place, not too far from here. And she would have us go out there and gather up these stones to make stuff with, to do stuff with, to border her sidewalk, just whatever little project she had in mind. But she would always go out there with us, and we'd go out and find a pile of rocks and just start piling them up. And I remember on 2 occasions, we're piling up rocks, and she's just walking around there, and there are smaller piles of rocks, not far from where these rocks were. But she would tell us, don't touch those rocks. And when we asked her why, she said, those belong to those hairy people. Okay. So, we always, when she would tell us things like that, we thought she was just trying to scare us, But she would not let us take rocks from certain mounds. She would make sure that we did not take rocks from certain mounds. And, I remember that from when I was 13, 14 years old, going out and helping her get rocks. But she didn't want certain rock piles to be touched.
Did she ever say how she knew that they were these things?
She never told. And I wish she was still alive today so I could go ask her. Because if you sit down and ask her and talk to her, she would tell you. But she wouldn't volunteer information. You had to actually pointedly ask her a question, She was one of those type people, like a lot of Native Americans are. You gotta be kind of specific in the question you ask, or you're not going to get an answer.
Very true.
You're not going to get a good answer.
Right.
You're going to get, a portion of an answer. But she used to tell us all the time when we were playing. There was the Tallapoosa River bordered the backside of their property, or a portion of the backside of their property, and we could go down a trail through the woods. It was a good little walk, but it wasn't out of the realm of kids. And we'd go down there and fish. And there were several creeks that crossed our property that flowed into the Tallapoosa. And she would always just tell us, just watch out for those people. And she had a name for them. And when I cannot remember for the life of me what that name was that she called them. But it basically meant those people that live in the woods. And, teenager that time, like I said, we thought she was just trying to scare us, trying to keep us, trying to make us behave, don't get in no trouble or anything like that. That was all we thought, because we never saw anything that scared us like that. But as I listen to you guys when we're talking, doing question and answer and campfire talk, I think back about things that happened when we were young that, our minds couldn't explain. We, have no idea,
That happens, though. It's like we'll be in a conversation or either with us or people listening, and they'll say, wow, I never thought about that, that particular aspect. Or it's like, when I mentioned when I was about 10, didn't have any idea there were such things out there as these creatures. And we saw the brush being thrashed or the kid coming up to our house and, pretty shaken up about the rock quarry monster. And we're like, this kid's a nut, but looking back at it from a few years later, after I ran into two of these things, I'm like, oh, that's what was going on.
And you see, that's something that's been happening with me ever since my encounter.
Yeah.
There were things that happened to me all throughout my life when I was hunting, fishing, camping, whatever, roaming the woods. Sometimes I'd just go walk through the woods, and there were things that would happen that I couldn't really explain it, but I tried to pass it off as, it's probably this or probably that, just like when we were talking a few shows back about our food being stolen from our hunting club. Things like that. We never could explain exactly what happened. We just put together, what we thought.
Right.
Probably
you just try thinking, well, that was kind of weird, but, maybe it was this. Your brain's trying to look for an answer, and you kind of give it whatever you got at the moment, and off you go. But it's kind of like with Mike's email, he's kind of in the process of doing the same thing. He's hearing things he's not familiar with, seeing things he's not familiar with, where things just don't quite add up to normal situations.
Yeah, and you see, down here, what information I had about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, it was always in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
California, all the way up to Washington, Canada, Alaska, So the thought of one of them being down here, or the thought of them living down here, never crossed my mind up until the moment of my encounter. And it still took me several weeks after my encounter to figure, I guess that might have been a Bigfoot,
Well, it's like we talked to Chris last week. He was kind of of the same mind. He didn't think that the creatures would be in the place where he was at, and lo and behold, they were there.
Yeah, and listening to every time, I listen to a show and we're talking, I try to just, open up ears, keep mouth shut, and I just listen. And every time we do one of these shows, there is one of those, aha, it explains something that I experienced or happened, before I had my encounter, when we just couldn't figure out what the hell was going on.
I think a lot of people, they're under the mistaken impression that when we're doing field work, et cetera, in this topic, that it's all cut and dried, and it's easy to explain. I've been involved in this for more than 50 years now, and that's the way it's worked that entire time. Yeah, you go out and you get pieces here and there, And it's a long, difficult process, but it's exactly like this when you're talking to people, and like, Chuck and I found the same things. We got the same responses from Native Americans, and the things now you're talking about. We sort of piece these things together, and pretty soon it's like, we start bridging some gaps. But it takes a long time to do that.
And that happens to me every time I listen to you guys talking. I mean, that's why I don't talk a lot. I'm just sitting here listening, trying to, factor in all of this stuff. Because ever since my encounter, there were a lot of things that's happened to me in my life, especially out in the woods, that there's just no logical explanation for.
And that's kind of the big thing is like, you look at the things you're familiar with and that that are, let's say, animal tracks you're looking at or sounds and things like that. You're well familiar with those because you've seen the animals do those things and so on. And then there are things that are just way outside of that. And you always think, well, no,
exactly.
It's not just, and a lot of people, unfortunately, will jump to conclusions and say, it's a joke on Facebook, somebody passed gas. Oh, that was Bigfoot, just joking, right? You see the memes like that, but you have to kind of scratch your head and say, well, what is that? Is it this? Is it possibly this? I like to use Bigfoot as the course of last resort. That's the last answer I want to come to. If unless it's something that I'm familiar with that I've heard elsewhere numerous times.
And I told you about the place up under a little bridge where we used to put deer into the creek and sink them, so they'd stay cool. And on several occasions, in fact, the one where I lost one of my deer, we had 3 deer just soaking in that cool water, kind of up under the bridge. I mean, it's not like you could see them if you drove across that bridge.
Right.
This bridge is on a little dirt road. It was a little small iron bridge. It was only about 20 or 30 foot long. The creek was only maybe a foot to a foot and a half deep right there where it flowed over the rocks up under that creek. To see those deer, you would have had to get out of the vehicle to walk down to where you could get a view up under the bridge. You know what I mean? Down to the. Well, we always just put it up to somebody came down this dirt road and seen our deer and they just jumped out and grabbed.
Yeah.
But the day that my deer went missing and 2 others, we had been hunting in that area right alongside that dirt road all day that day. We had been there.
So you would have seen anybody come along.
None of us ever heard a car go down that dirt road that wasn't one of the hunting club members. We never heard a vehicle. We never saw vehicles because it was a dead-end dirt road. Well, it was actually 2 dirt roads that met into one and then went to where a bridge used to be years ago, and the bridge got burned down. But it was a dead-end dirt road. Nobody, the people we leased the land from were the only ones that owned the land, so there were no houses around, no homes, no barns, it was just all woods, So, and during hunting season, now during the summer, those roads would see a lot of traffic from people going down to the creek to fish. But during hunting season, nobody went down those roads because they knew we were out there hunting, and we used to tell them, this is all hunting club land. You really, shouldn't be out here, Even though it was a county road, we'd just tell them, there ain't nothing out here. What are you doing here?
And some of oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say they would usually just, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize,
Sure.
Because a lot of times they'd be screwing up our hunt.
Oh, yeah.
When they drive down the road. But, yeah, I mean, the only explanation we had was somebody saw those deer and grabbed them.
Yeah, that's the reasonable conclusion I think you'd come to.
And the big footprints in the sandbar right there walking where you would walk up under the bridge, they were huge, but when you walk in sand, even a baby leaves huge footprints walking in loose sand.
Right, yeah. So you wouldn't think anything
all we
of it.
thought was somebody had boots on,
It's like your situation there, Forrest, with all the things that have gone on. And people might say, well, make excuses for something getting into where the cat house is, and those kinds of things. But we've heard this kind of stuff elsewhere. It's not just, that's why when I listen very carefully when you talk about these things that happen, because I've heard this stuff. Examples like, and I was just thinking of a good one, but, we talked to Brenda Harris, and she talked about, people there at the Navajo reservation, with the creatures getting into the chicken enclosures, opening those doors and things. But there was another one that TW talked about, where, and I just lost it. I was thinking, I'll get 2 or 3 different things that'll hit my mind at one time, but there was, when he was in college, and he had to write a paper, and he called me and he says, hey, what's a good Bigfoot topic to write about? And we discussed it, and then he decided to do it on the Minnesota Iceman. So he wrote the paper, and I gave one information I could and everything. So this professor he had, everybody laughed at him and gave him a bunch of guff, and including the professor. And the professor's whole foundation for his laughing was, oh, well, if these things are real, there's no juvenile prints. So TW contacts me, and I sent him a bunch of different juvenile footprint pictures. He took the pictures, showed the professor. Professor had a whole change of heart. Well, and it went further than that. This professor apparently raised, and I think it was beagles, but he raised dogs and had a bunch of them in this large enclosure. And it wasn't long after their discussion with the footprint pictures and everything that one of these things, and this guy was just totally didn't believe in the topic, got in that enclosure, killed a bunch of his dogs, and apparently took some. It was a really frightening experience, apparently, what he found. So, when somebody tells me that, like with you, Forrest, when they're getting into the cat enclosure or they're doing things there, I listen very carefully because I've heard this stuff. It's repeated behaviors.
Yeah, well, I think that unfortunately, with academia, you have the problems sometimes with some of them, not all of them, that if it doesn't fit into their focus, and sometimes it can be very narrow-minded. This is the reason we have things that aren't recognized and you don't hear about until 20 years later about discoveries they've made. And I think, too, that would probably be the same thing with Bigfoot. If somebody actually did truthfully make a discovery in the academia world, that we probably wouldn't hear about it for 20 or 30 years. But on the same token, you've got Bigfooters that, and there's plenty of them out there, that if, something is brought to their attention and it doesn't fit into their, what they think is Bigfoot activity or something that a Bigfoot would do, then they're willing to discount it. And this is the problem that you probably don't, that you have. I think this might be a problem where you have some academia that don't even want to get into discussions of Bigfoot because they're sticking their neck out either way they go.
I think they feel professionally they're going to get lumped in with crazies.
Well, I'm sure there's probably plenty of them out there that probably think that about me, and they probably think that about, and I know they think that about Jeff Meldrum because people have actually said it. There are a few anthropologists and archaeologists that will stick their neck out and say stuff like that. I mean, I'm one of those that, frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn what people think. I've reached that age that I just don't care. So, I think that that's a problem you run into both in the academic world and the Bigfooter world. So,
I think
and most of these people that are in Bigfoot aren't even trained in any kind of field. So they're just out there, and so they're willing to, if it doesn't fit into their profile of what they think it should be, then they just discount everything.
I think Meldrum would do a good job if he quit buddying up with the hoaxers and the wrong people. He's had kind of a bad record of doing that. I mean, Todd Standing, and there's a whole litany of people he's buddied up to, and it's like, come on, guy, you're smarter than that.
Well, yeah. I mean, if, of course, believe it or not, I don't think he has a degree in anthropology, but I think it's actually anatomy. And, I mean, anybody that looks at those heads that are out there, that Standing put out there, and I don't like belittling.
Right.
I don't like belittling people openly on air, but this one I will, because he has just made
talking
really
about that, Will.
That's right. We're just, it's just our opinions now.
Yeah, strictly our opinions, but anybody is welcome to look at. I welcome you to look at Todd Standing's face, look specifically at his upper lip, and then look at the heads that he has had. He has, and I'm going to just say it. He's created, my opinion, because there's never any bodies that go with these heads. It's just heads, and his upper lip. Those Bigfoot have upper lips that are just identical to his. So I rest my case.
Well, I always say,
Todd,
we were
you're
just
welcome.
talking about that the other night.
Let me put out there, Todd, you're welcome to call me if you want to argue with me. Just contact Bill. He'll give you my phone number. So
I always,
if you want to argue, I'll argue with you.
I always say my favorite people in the world, and this sounds maybe counter to what people would think about somebody who investigates the Sasquatch, is my favorite people out there are skeptics. Now, what I mean by skeptics are not debunkers. There's kind of three categories of people out there, right? When you look at any topic, on one side you've got this little small fringe of people who really believe anything, and then there's on the other side the people who believe nothing. But in the middle you've got this huge section of the population that I'll call skeptic. And that's because they're not convinced yet, but they're kind of on the fence. If you were to show them some good evidence, they'd say, okay, I'll buy that. You show them something's fake, yep, that's fake. But they're not going way off into any particular direction. They're kind of on the fence, and they stay away from a lot of things because there's so much nonsense out there. But that's my favorite person, and the reason being is because they will scrutinize things. They'll think about what it is you're presenting. And I encourage that. I want people to think about stuff and question it and really dig into it to find out the truth.
That would have been me before my encounter. I mean, I didn't not believe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but I didn't think that they were here,
right
down here where I live, where I grew up. This is something. I mean, I remember seeing the Patterson film when I was young. I was like 7 or 8 years old, and it scared the hell out of me. And my dad was sitting there watching this show with me. He's like, "What's wrong?" Because I'd run behind his chair and was holding his arm, and that thing scared me that bad.
Oh yeah.
And he said, "Oh, son, don't worry. They don't live over here. That's out there in California."
Yep, surprise.
And yeah, boo, 2013. Oh my God, what the hell is this? And I wonder sometimes if my father was still alive and I could tell him about this, because he is probably the one person that I would have told. He passed away in 1998. He is probably the one person I would have told, because he was a quiet man. He didn't talk a lot. He listened a lot.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't an educated man. He quit school in like 8th grade, but he was excellent at his job as a mechanic. He worked on machines in the plant that I ended up working at, a very tough job. And you had to have some smarts to do this job.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't, but he was mechanically gifted. He could take anything apart and rebuild it and get it to work again. He was always that way growing up. I learned that from his mother, my grandmother. But he would have been the one person that I would have told this to when this happened to me.
I always wonder if my dad ever saw anything. He would have never said. It just wasn't the way he was geared. He was, he was a World War II vet. he was an outdoorsman. In fact, I think my mom told me that he actually, for a short time, held the Washington State record for salmon. The size of the salmon that he caught. But when he would hunt, it wasn't. And he taught me. He said, you never hunted with a scope ever. He was death on scopes. He said, number one, you don't want to be packing things a ways away. You want to pick your shot and be damn sure of what you're shooting at. And you look at deer and you'd say, 2 or 3 point, take it if you want to. But he would always go for the trophies if he could do that. And he was just that kind of a guy. So, and he worked for the county where he was out, in the rivers and stuff daily. So, he never said anything about when, we said that we found the footprints, and I never asked him. We just, we weren't really that close. So it wasn't like we could just sit down and have a conversation about it.
I was really close to my father, and, we could get together and be doing something, and we wouldn't even have to talk. He could just hold out his hand. I knew which wrench he wanted,
Mm-hmm.
I knew what, we could work together on something like that. We might speak 10 words the whole time we're doing it, unless it was an ouch or, oh shit, why'd you do that,
Right.
but my father, I remember times now when I was young, and my father, he loved fishing. And we would go down to the river. We would go to creeks and just walk down the bank, find a good spot and fish. But I remember times where we're catching a lot of fish, and all of a sudden that's all right. We need to go. Why? Well, it's just time to go. Come on, let's go. Let's go home and get something to eat.
Yeah.
And I wish I could ask him about those times now.
It's funny. It's funny what people would think about things. Say back in the 50s or 60s. We had a family friend named Charlie, and Charlie was one of those guys. He definitely lived off the grid. I think he worked for the Park Service at Mount Rainier when I was really little for a few years, and he only had one other job that I can remember. He just didn't fit well in the whole structure of boss employee relations. So he lived off the forest. But he told me a story one time when he worked for the Mount Rainier National Park Service that he and this other guy, they were doing some trail maintenance in a place called Stevens Canyon. And they were way down in the bottom, and I can't remember what river's down at the bottom of that, but they were down there. And he says, I saw the darndest thing down there. We saw this huge bear standing on its hind legs with a salmon in its mouth, or a steelhead, whichever it was. But so years later, when I was doing this stuff, I said, Charlie, did you ever think that maybe that wasn't a bear? And he said, well, it was really weird because I never saw a bear stand up on its hind legs like that up on a rock. He says, and it had this big fish in its mouth. So then he started questioning his own, foundation on what he did and didn't know out there.
I question everything now, and I listen. I mean, I may not vocally question, but I'll listen and question this in my head, especially listening to you guys. You guys have tons more experience than I have. I had an encounter, and I have not since then went out trying to find them, and I don't think I ever will. I don't have to have it proven to me that they're out.
You mean you don't want to go to forests and chase the chimps around?
Well, I'll come out there and pee around on a fence post if she wants to. That seems to get a good reaction from them.
What do you think, Forrest? Uh-oh, did we lose?
What about peeing on the fence post?
Having Tracy come out and pee on the fence post?
Yeah, he can pee on every fence post if he likes. I'm not going to watch him doing it, but you can.
Just as long as you back me up when they come for me.
Yeah, we'll back you up.
Oh man.
Well, I'm still looking for the sunflowers. I haven't found any yet.
You're going to be looking, Chuck, for that female Sasquatch that's got a thing for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just take her bouquet of flowers, Chuck, and she'll be happy.
Ooh, lover boy.
How about you, David?
Well, as far as what we've been talking about, I would remind people not to be so quick to dismiss anything when they're out in the field. If you see something that you're not used to, if it doesn't fit your narrative, don't dismiss it. Take a picture of it, take notes. If you see it again, go back to those notes, go back to the pictures. You might be onto something. Don't just dismiss it.
Well, in terms of Bigfoot, anyway. Some of that other weird stuff out there, I don't know. Of course, I don't deal with all that other weird stuff, so.
I agree 100% with what he's saying. I mean, because if I had been doing any kind of a research before my encounter, it probably wouldn't have shocked me so bad when I had that encounter. But at that time, I had not, I mean, other than the books that I had read in high school and you know, seeing the TV specials, the one with Leonard Nimoy, and when I was a kid, I'm 30-something years old when this is happening out there on that hunting club property. This is, we were just trying to associate it with what we knew could have happened. None of the guys with me ever mentioned Bigfoot.
Well, you're making reasonable assumptions based on what you know. Unless something comes along that's
and that was all
outside
we
of
had
that.
to go by.
Yeah, unless something happens.
That was all we had to go by.
Exactly. Unless something happens where it takes it to that next level.
I mean, there was the one guy that was in the club. I think I told you about it, Will, who said he saw a Sasquatch or he saw a big hairy thing walk alongside of a creek that crossed the power line while he was sitting in a tree stand. And, the power lines that went across our property was about 100 yards wide. And he said he watched it all the way from it coming from the woods on the side he was on till it went into the woods on the other side. Other than that, I never heard anything about Bigfoot. There was always some explanation for things that happened, just like our food being scattered out. Now there's a bunch of coons come over here and gotten our shit. We always could find a plausible explanation for what happened.
Oh, sure.
Never could figure out why they didn't eat the hot sandwiches, but
well, Well, guys, I hate to say it, we're out of time. Anybody got anything final before we wrap this up?
I'd just like to say I thank all of you for educating me because, like I said, every time I'm on one of these shows, I listen to you guys and I learn new things. I'm able to solve issues, problems, what could have done that, So I'd like to thank all of you for that.
Well, talking to you guys, it really helps. And Tom and I've talked about this. We've been in, of course, many conversations for hours and hours. But I've forgotten, over doing this for so long, there's a lot of things that just aren't, on the surface of my thinking. And it even surprises me sometimes, like, we'll be in a conversation about something and then something will pop up that's relevant to that conversation. And Tom would be like, oh, wow, and I said, sometimes this stuff I don't remember it until we're talking about it because there's just so much kind of crammed in there, so to speak. But it's very helpful to be able to talk to everybody and when this stuff comes out. Forrest, Chuck, David, you guys got anything?
Not from me.
Nope, I don't think so.
Chuck, how about you?
Another good campfire, and I appreciate all the input that everybody gives, and it's just good to have a group like this. I think where we can sit and talk about what we think about, and I think we learn every time we do a show.
I think you're right, and I really appreciate everybody that's sitting around the fire here today, and you guys are always the best, And for anybody listening out there that wants to sit in, you're more than welcome. Just get a hold of us, and you can either get a hold of me at my personal email, wjevning@gmail.com, or contact Tom, at questions@creekdevil.com. But, you're more than welcome to sit in with us and, chew the fat around the fire. So with that, folks,
I know I learned a lot.
Yep. So with that, folks, we'll wrap it up and, come visit us next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.